Wait, are you reading the Bible, or is that the headline right there? God saving the children from the burning building.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Hosea. What are you thinking, Adrian, about this particular text and everything that it brings with it for the sermon you're working on?
Yes, that's a really good question. I think what I'm struck by, because we're also about to enter Advent and we've been chewing on these texts as a whole story, I am struck by the devastation in these texts paired alongside God's utter tenderness. So in the Hosea text, there's the metaphor of parent and child, and there's the metaphor of God chasing after the kid, almost like a toddler, like
Yeah.
one of
Oh,
yours.
I had so much, like, I know what this is like when I
Oh
was
my
reading this
gosh.
morning.
Oh my gosh. The cords of kindness and the bands of love just makes you melt. And if you have a child, and particularly a child of that age, I think this really gets you in a deep and powerful place. The ways that children can be cruel, in, in a way that I don't think they're aware of, which is sort of the power of this text. There's a way in which it's out of kind of utter lack of awareness and utter ignorance that the child Israel is turning from God, and God is chasing after them. The images of the cheeks and the lifting up and the carrying, and then the stubbornness that the child is going to do what the child is going to do, and God certainly could. What did a friend of mine, why hasn't God smote them yet? She loves to say, when is God going to smote them? And but it doesn't come. I think God thinks about it, but then God is like, I just can't do it. In the same ways that I think we, don't want to harm our child. We still want to run and protect them, and hover over them, and make sure that all is well, and take the hits for ourselves. And that's what we get from this God.
I read one commentator saying one of the first glimpses within the Hebrew scriptures of God having this kind of persona of, like, but I just love you, and I'm here for you. And it's like how does it even land, how can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? My heart recoils within me, my compassion grows warm and tender. And this is what I love about the prophets, because they were just such emotional people. They just were tuned in to empathy, and so the way that they give voice to God has that kind of empathetic thrust. Especially here in Hosea, it's not the "Thus says the Lord, smite, smite, smite,"
Right,
but it's
right.
this, which is also fitting for Hosea, where this one snapshot gives us this beautiful poem as we just described, but Hosea's narrative as a whole, he marries a woman named Gomer,
Yeah.
who some translations call her a promiscuous woman. Some call her a whore. All sorts. So there's a lot going on there. We could take a feminist lens too. But the point being, his marriage was one where the narrative shows she was not faithful to him, yet he was still faithful to her. And obviously that's a metaphor for what Israel is doing and God is doing. And then here we see now the metaphor of a parent and a toddler, and like, even when you don't want to go down for nap time, I
Right.
still love you, which is what
I
I'm
still
hearing
love
upstairs
you.
right now.
Right, exactly. And there are commentators who also say that this is probably one of our earliest images of God as mother. We certainly could say parent, but there are commentators who are like, no, this description would have been a female job. So God is cast as a female God, as a girl God. And there's something really powerful in that. The other thing I want to point out, because we cannot help reading these texts of destruction and disregard without thinking about what's happening in the world right now, particularly in Gaza, in Israel, Palestine. And that line at the end where God says, I am God and no mortal, is also piercing and chilling, because God does not act on God's impulse to destroy. in the ways that we are seeing humans act on their impulses to destroy. And it's not just what's happening now, but even being reminded, as the U.S. is encouraging Israel to use restraint, being reminded that we did not use restraint when it came to 9/11. We could have, and there was a brief moment when it looked like we were going to choose another way, a creative third way, and instead we just manufactured weapons of mass destruction and went in and obliterated people, as is happening now. So this reminder humbles us, I think, that God is God and we are not, and that God is able to pull back in ways that we often and sadly are not.
And that is too often the human impulse of, I think it's the response, the American response after Pearl Harbor. What kind of restraint
Yes.
did we show there?
Yes.
And you would hope we would have learned from that. Like, oh, maybe that it worked, but at what cost? Like we ended, whose humanity was lost in the process, and similarly, and yeah, God is God and we are not, and it just shows the ceiling we keep running into with our mortality, and how we
Right.
are grateful for perspectives beyond that, and we get a glimpse of that here. Though, so I was digging a bit because I'm a little perplexed because I read that same thing. I'm like, oh, that's so nice. God's not gonna let these people get all messed up, but then they
Well, not
do.
at that
Like,
moment. Yeah, I know.
yeah,
It's coming. It's coming.
it's coming because
Yeah.
it's Assyria. They end up going into. We never get Israel again. I mean, Judah
Right.
kind of comes back as a remnant later with the whole Ezra
Right.
Nehemiah stories,
Yeah.
but Israel, these tribes, whoop, they
That's
get
right.
just
That's
absorbed
right.
into the civilizations around them. So
Yeah, they
yeah.
get double for their sin. I don't remember which prophet's coming up where it's like, okay, y'all, maybe it's Jeremiah.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you did this thing, and you're going to get double for your sin. And you can you can just hear a parent saying that as well. Okay, I've had it.
Yeah,
Where's my wooden
yeah,
spoon? But then we get the highway for our
yeah.
God, and God running down the highway to rescue the children as if from a burning building. Um, and you
Wait,
might
are
say
you
that
reading
these.
the Bible, or is that the headline right there? God saving the children from the burning
Oh
building.
my gosh, yeah. I think a little bit of both. I think a little bit
Yeah,
of both. And you're like, hurry up, God. These kids really need you. All your children need you right
yeah.
now. The buildings are on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think, this image of God as mother, this depiction of Israel as this toddler child, innocent, not entirely helpless, but still in need of protection from so many powers that be. It can't help but bring us to the parallels of just what we're seeing in the world. And I
Including
like,
itself, right?
yeah, yeah.
Maybe most importantly, protection from itself.
Yeah. I was talking with some other friends in clergy about just how do we sit with everything happening in Israel, Palestine, Gaza, and just saying anything can feel difficult at times. It's just let me learn as much as possible. But I've come to, I always want to stand on the side where children are at risk. Like,
Yeah.
to me, that just seems like the place I want to always position myself, no matter what.
Um,
If there are children at risk, that's the side that needs, I think, that's where God is found. That's where people of faith should be present, because that's just where we need to offer solidarity and protection and presence. And this
Absolutely.
this this text gives us that picture beautifully.
Right, right. And just to say clearly and full-throatedly, there were children who were harmed on October 7th, Jewish children who were harmed, and we believe God was there. And we also believe God is in the rubble in Gaza with the children who are being harmed there. And, I believe that a ceasefire is what is needed and wanted at this time. I think there is a difference between defending oneself and what appears to be happening in Gaza at this time. Yeah, so I think the ceasefire, the humanitarian aid, and the calls for this to stop, so that we're not wiping out people intentionally and needlessly, and 50% of those people to be children is heartbreaking and not humanity at its best moment.
How how do you bring all of this into a sermon? I'm just thinking of like, it's there's the headlines around us that are constantly bombarding us. But then there's also the realities in our world that aren't in the news cycle. Like we're all talking about Gaza and Israel and Palestine since October 7th. But people have been talking about it before then. There's atrocities happening. How do you just hold the global trauma and then the like flash of a headline that our congregant, like, just what's the way that all comes together in this, justice and pastoral care, and then a prophetic text like this one, and just I'm just asking for myself and my own sermon writing skills here. How do you do that? How do you balance all those spinning plates, or the ones that aren't even as visible and they're very much a gravity in the world?
Right. Well, you know that I love to read the text out loud. I love to read it multiple times aloud, to read it slowly and listen for the poetry. I mean, I'm not reading it in the original language, so my Hebrew Bible professor, Jeffrey Kwan, would want me to. But even reading it in the English with its troublesome translation, there is poetry there. And there are words that I think dance with our spirit and dance with the times that we're in and dance with the universality of what it means to be a child of God. And so for me in this text, it's the tenderness piece. It's the notion that we're all children of God, whether, regardless of our age. And for me, there's a universality in that longing to be picked up and held and protected and caressed and comforted and all the things that I think, God's big children are demonstrating that they are lacking right now, because I think some of what's happening, whether it's on the big stage of the world or in our own workplaces and homes, is a lot of stuff that happened when we were children that make us yell at our colleagues or be needlessly cruel to our own children or to strangers on the street. There's something in us that makes us do some of the less than godly things that we do. And so this notion of a God who is tender, I think, is calling us back to the God in whose image we are made. And so I feel like I'm always looking for that thing that says, again, we've got a chance to do this better. And we've got a God who wants to love us into our full and true selves.
Yeah.
I hope that got it, what you were saying. Where's the
Probably that.
universal thing
Yeah.
that is true, whether what's happening in the world is happening or
Yep.
not, or the thing
Yep.
that's true for all of us. And I think there's a truth that we need that tender healing, because we've all got a wound that needs a touch.
And I think, when we see headlines for weeks now, almost a month, like we've been with this current ongoing conflict, to make those connections, I think, is essential, because we're all experiencing this global trauma, that's happening in an isolated place all the time. From the headlines we're seeing, whether you're looking or not, it's just there. So when you say it like that, it helps me make meaning of this or engage with this and see it as a broad, understand the broader sweeps and finding God in the midst of it all. And it prepares me for when another thing happens in a week, a month, a year. You're giving language to even process all of that, not to mention our own, childhood trauma that we need to keep processing.
Right, which we are constantly processing and hopefully doing it well enough that we're not dumping stuff on one another and, causing each other additional pain. And you said something I think is important about meaning making. I know for some people, what we're able to offer in a sermon does allow for meaning making. And I think for some other people, they're just not there yet. And I wanted to say that that's okay. I think what good preaching also does is plant some seeds. And I think if it keeps you churning, even if what you're churning with is, well, that was just stupid. What that churning will do, I think what that quaking will do, is shake some things loose that will, along the way, help with possible meaning making. This is going to land for some people on Sunday, and it's not going to land for some people maybe until Wednesday, and for some others maybe never. But it can be surprising how things that you hear will come back and work on you in a way that leads to a future healing. I mean, that's always the hope. And I think the good gift and grace of the Holy Spirit is that our imperfect words can continue to work in people for God's good and God's glory.
In ways we meant them to or not. But
That's
I'm
right.
like, hey, if it led to something good and life-giving, Yep,
Yeah.
that's what I meant too. I'm glad that came through.
Right, right, right. Yeah, God can use it. So we're just praying because these texts over the next few weeks, they are tough texts that are that
Yeah.
are being lifted up in a really tough time in the world. And we're going into Advent, this season of hope and expectation with some really difficult texts. But there's a way in which I always feel like the lectionary doesn't let us down because there's a way in which I think they are giving us a space to process what's really painful and difficult as opposed to just going to the happy, happy, joy, joy of
Yeah.
baby Jesus on the way.
Yep.
We got some work to do and some pain to process on the way to getting the labor, the laboriousness of getting this child born. So in a way, we've got perfect texts for this moment.
We really do, and that's coming soon. We'll totally dive into Advent, I promise, on an upcoming week, talking about Advent themes and big picture and where it's going to be good. But yeah, I was just looking as well at what's coming up this week. It's Hosea. Next week, in Isaiah, then Second Kings with Josiah's reform. Hey, that's kind of a bright spot. And then Jeremiah and the promise of the Messiah for our first Sunday in Advent. And it's going to be a really good season. This Sunday, I think, is obviously going to be another rich and powerful one. But just the way it moves us, that I think, there's lots of things to love about the narrative lectionary. My favorite is the way there is this kind of momentum, and I feel like it is there's a lot of we're glossing over a lot of narrative elements. We go from this to that very quickly, but there's still a trajectory, and you can feel like there's something pushing us or pulling us or carrying us, and I like that energy, and that we get to ride that wave to see where it might lead and what kinds of things we notice along the way. So here's to noticing along the way. It's going to be good.
Amen.
Well, as always, drop your questions, comments, ideas about this particular text, Hosea. It's really a good one. If you haven't yet, you should read it out loud because of all of them, this is just poetry, like literal poetry, and it's gorgeous. And if you have a 3-year-old nearby, read it while chasing them or holding them. It'll make it even feel more meaningful. That's what I did this morning at breakfast. It was great. Leave your comments, leave all your things, and then we'll be back again. Next week, we have a guest with us, so we won't say any more. She's like an in-house guest, so kind of a guest. But then, okay, we'll talk to you next week. Bye.